This episode of Bartholomew Town is brought to you by the University of Rhode Island Online, Newport Film, Navigant Credit Union, Half Street Group, and Health Source RI for employers.
Bartholomew Town.
The Morning Consult poll is out, and it's once again not great news for Governor Dan McKee. The headline, he has the lowest approval rating of any governor in the United States. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Bartholomew, and welcome into Bartholomew Town. Look, this is not a brand new trend for the governor, who has not had good polling numbers really at all in recent years. And I think there's a lot of things to remember here as we start to take a look at this in the context of two different areas. Number one, on a political level, right? I mean, the governor right now is in a head-to-head primary matchup with Helena Bonanno-Foulkes, the former CVS executive who nearly defeated McKee in 2022, now mounting a much more substantial campaign on a grassroots level. And she is certainly well-funded and definitely has the backing of a lot of the Rhode Island political spectrum, so to speak, at least on a sub-rosa level. That's one lane as McKee continues to try to differentiate himself from Bonanno-Foulkes in every way, shape, and form. She's spending a lot of time saying, hey, McKee is, maybe compromised. Maybe he's incompetent. Whatever the case is, take a look at the Washington Bridge situation here in Rhode Island, and that's all you need to know. At the same time, McKee and his campaign, they're saying, well, Bonanno-Foulkes, she was at CVS during the opioid epidemic, and therefore she is disqualified from any kind of credible leadership. And that's been a lot of the back and forth in this race already. Now, look, we have plenty of time. Here we are in October of 2025. Of course, the primary in September of 2026. But make no mistake about it. I've said it a couple of times here on the podcast that we, in this post-Labor Day era, with candidates now getting in and other people who were potential candidates announcing that they're not getting into the race, and races, this is political season. So these polls actually do matter a little bit more. But then there's the other side of this whole thing, which is the governance side, right? Which is the whole, hey, yes, you're running for re-election if you're Governor Dan McKee, but you're also the governor of the state of Rhode Island. So when you look at low approval ratings in real time, in terms of governance, there's also some questions that you've got to ask yourself if you're the McKee camp about, number one, what you're doing, but number two, how you're communicating that and how you're effectuating the impact of the work that you're doing on the community. So let me give you a little bit here. I'm going to read now from actually Dan McGowan over at the Boston Globe summarized this really well. And his headline also, Governor Dan McKee has the lowest approval rating of the country's 50 state chief executives. And this is the highest disapproval rating of any governor seeking re-election next year, according to that survey from Morning Consult. McKee has a 40% approval rating, slightly lower than the outgoing governor in Iowa, Kim Reynolds, and his 44% disapproval rating was behind both Reynolds and Governor Janet Mills up there in Maine, who's going to be challenging Susan Collins in that Senate race. So, look, this is a little bit better, actually, than some of the other polls. Think about that University of New Hampshire poll that came out most recently. McKee had a 24% approval rating and a 71% disapproval rating. So, I mean, here's the reality. You've got to look at this if you're Governor McKee. Like I said moments ago, you got to look at this in kind of two different buckets. I think on a political level right now, with the recurring not great or straight up bad polling numbers that McKee has pulled in recent times, they've got to be looking at this inside the political apparatus and saying, all right, well, we can't worry about that from the standpoint of how it's going to impact our decision making right now. We just need to continue to move forward, try to shore up fundraising, try to shore up whether it's labor unions or other major political factors in this state, and just keep doing what we're doing, kind of tune out the noise and get to a point where whether or not somebody else gets into this race, Dan McKee is not worried about, their message would be Dan McKee is not worried about polling numbers. He's not worried about any of that. He's just worried about focusing on being the governor. And here are X, Y, and Z accomplishments that we're going to stand on. And we're going to say, maybe these are the type of things that don't resonate in polls. All right. Think about the education work that the governor's doing, especially on absenteeism and trying to reduce absenteeism, which is a major problem, generally speaking, but particularly here in Rhode Island. You look at some of the numbers and you're like, yeah, this is a big issue. And that's work that Governor McKee has done. Now, does that resonate with the average everyday person in a way when you have a scenario like the Washington Bridge, a major dominant story? Does the average person who's being polled really even know about the work that the governor is doing at that level? So to me, right now, if I'm on a political side, I'm not freaking out about polling numbers. I'm more so just thinking about a general, hey, we know we need to retool and recalculate some of the messaging that we're putting out there because we're not getting through to people about the things that we're doing. At least that would be my assumption. And so I look at it like, well, forget about the 40%, forget about the 17%, whatever. Just simply look at it as, what do we need to do to tell the story of Dan McKee in a way that we're not doing right now, right? That's the political question that the people inside the McKee political operation need to be asking. We're going to see, all right? We're going to see if this becomes just a drawn out back and forth about, well, McKee says folks is compromised because of opioids, that's it. Meanwhile, she hits back on the Washington Bridge, or are we going to get into some more storytelling, some more depth? If there is a story to tell around any of the accomplishments or any of the goals set forth by Dan McKee in his 2030 plan, how does that look? How is it actually impacting people on the ground? Because right now, I honestly believe most people are looking around and they're saying, I don't feel any real connection to my government here in Rhode Island. And there's an obvious conclusion, there's a disconnect, and how that disconnect is healed, that's going to be the strategy that we're going to have to watch for, if it is healable, by the way. All right? Now, there's also other factors in this situation that I think are really important to consider. One is, does Speaker of the House Joe Shekarchi get into the governor's race? He clearly is considering it. He's even indicated he wouldn't make a decision until next year. He's going to start next session inside the General Assembly as the Speaker of the House. And then from there, what are we going to see? Like a March announcement from the Speaker? He's going to step away? Is he going to continue to serve as Speaker? How's that going to work out? I'm sure he would most likely stay in office. It's hard to imagine that he wouldn't, but he's also a full-time attorney, and there's a lot of reasons why someone might make the argument, can you do everything at once, or are you just going to concentrate on running for governor? But here's the thing about Shekarchi. Nobody knows who the Speaker of the House is. So for Shekarchi to get in would require a huge amount of name recognition development, right? Dan McKee, as the sitting governor, he should have that. Bonanno folks, both because of the fact that she ran last time in 2022 and because she's been way out in front. And look, all of a sudden, I've said it on television, I've said it a couple of places, all of a sudden now Helena Bonanno folks is like riding RIPTA. She's all of a sudden like the transit advocate, and really take your microcosm of different left-wing issues, and she's found a way to position herself inside the grassroots. So last time, people, one, didn't even know that she necessarily existed, and now, two, she's at least making an effort to say, I know that these are big issues like transit, like healthcare, whatever it is, and I'm now trying to meet the people on the ground where they are, so I can introduce myself and say, I'm your advocate, and by the way, your current administration, they're not your advocate. RIPTA is a perfect example because McKee and the current administration at Department of RIPTA and even DOT is relevant here. Peter Alviti, the director of the Department of Transportation, is chair of the board of RIPTA. That's a good example on transit where cuts have come, and now we're seeing a moment where we're having significant cuts in RIPTA over, really, at the end of the day, it's not de minimis, but it's a small amount of money to plug that hole, to plug that gap. And it just didn't come to fruition in this year's budget. So, for example, RIPTA and transit, it's a great lane for an opponent of Dan McKee to get in and pound over and over again that he has let down a portion of the state. He hasn't listened to people, and he hasn't given them what they need. At the same time, McKee can say, well, wait a minute, we've got a fiscal mindset here that I've maintained, and I need to stay disciplined because part of my doctrine is at least some level of fiscal discipline and management. So that's the type of dynamic we have right now. We've got these big ticket issues, opioids and the bridge, and then on the next level down, folks saying, well, on all these little pockets that a Democrat governor should be like a leader on, we're making the argument he's absent, and we're here not only filling that void, but we're here to be a true advocate in this space. And so the correction there needs to be storytelling. And I don't mean make up stories. I mean, tell the story of Dan McKee in a way that gets us to a place as a state where the Rhode Islander out there who hears this podcast or watches a television news broadcast, reads an article in the Projo or the Globe, whatever, when they read or hear or see Dan McKee in a quote or in reference, their brain starts to fire on a number of different things, not just simply, oh yeah, this was the guy who's governor during the Washington Bridge. So that's the political lane. Now on the governance lane, this is something that we don't talk about enough, folks. We spend a lot of time talking about the impact of polls or political footing in the context of elections. But what about in the context of governance? When you're consistently polling in a way that shows whether it's dismal numbers like 17 or not very good numbers like 40, you have to ask yourself about the operations of government. Now, I'm not here to say that Dan McKee is doing a bad job as governor, up, down, center, anything like that. That's not even really the point. The point is that Rhode Islanders want to have confidence in their governor. They want to have confidence in their government. And right now, at least based on the polling that's been available, and we're not just talking about today's Morning Consult poll, we're talking about University of New Hampshire, we're talking about other polls. You can make the case that the state of Rhode Island on a governance level, for sure the Washington Bridge a factor, for sure healthcare a factor. I think people look around, they say, what the hell's going on with housing? Yeah, there's been a lot of things introduced. There's been a lot of legislation passed and signed into law. There's been a lot of new projects launched with press conferences, but I don't think the average Rhode Islander right now actually believes that their existing government is working for them. And so there's obviously an overlap between governance and electability, because if people in the state were thrilled with how their governance was happening, they would probably take the position of, we want to continue this at some level in 2026. But I worry about that, folks. Again, there's always going to be a reason for anybody out there to have a problem with a particular agenda, a particular piece of legislation, a particular direction that the state's going. That's always going to be the case. I mean, you literally are not going to please all the people. But if you're Dan McKee right now, and you're the state of Rhode Island, you're the McKee administration, I do think more concerning than on an electability standpoint, right? It's just the idea that you're going around the state and you have a less than 50% approval rating, and in real time, as you're making decisions, you're now speaking to and reacting to a constituency that, at least in majority, and sometimes significant majority, is telling you we don't like what you're doing. So you have a couple options. You either hold steady with what you're doing and you just kind of exist with this bone-on-bone type of approach that seems to be, again, just not connecting, or in that arena, you retool as well. And so you're retooling on the political side from a storytelling standpoint, and you're retooling on a real-time governance lane to try to get people to understand what's happening and why they should feel any sort of connection or belief with their state government. The fact that that doesn't seem to be resonating, to me, is actually the more concerning thing. Again, you're not going to have everybody celebrating and popping balloons and blowing confetti or throwing confetti into the air, blowing those little horns you get at a birthday, but no one's going to be doing that every day. The bottom line is they have time here in October 2025. Remember, Raimondo didn't poll well in this Morning Consult poll. The candidate opposition factor and sort of environment was different when Raimondo polled pretty poorly in the Morning Consult poll ahead of her reelection bid, right? But at the end of the day, there's plenty of time to, if you're the McKee administration, to reshuffle the deck. And what you need to do, and what we have not seen happen, other than one area, which I'm going to tell you about in just a second, we haven't seen them do that. And that's impacting the political side and the governance side, where I don't think Rhode Islanders right now feel connected to their state government. And that's a big problem in and of itself, outside of the context of reelection. Now, where McKee has done more in real time, and you remember, you think back to the beginning of this calendar year, President Trump had a summit with governors at the White House. And Dan McKee, I was on WPRO with Dan York and Steve Klemke. McKee, he called into the show after this summit. He called in real time from the White House and talked about how he met with President Trump. He took a photo with the president and he wants to, work with him. Of course, a lot of this has to do with the bridge, the Washington Bridge, and making sure funding and so on and so forth is secured, right? And there's a good reason to do that. I mean, we need that funding, and we needed that funding, and we need to make sure that that bridge project is not something that gets politicized any more than it is. So you start getting into a federal political conversation, that's something that's going to negatively impact not only Rhode Islanders, but region-wide, right? So I commend the governor for having the sensibility to initially try to forge some kind of relationship there of substance, right? But as time went on, and as we're starting to see what is really happening with Donald Trump and this soft authoritarianism that's been introduced, and make no mistake about it, that's exactly what's happening here, folks. If you want to live in la-la land and pretend it's not, or if you want to say, look, I'm such a Trump fan that I'm going to ignore this reality, that's on you. But from a political science standpoint, there is no doubt that we have entered into soft authoritarianism, right? And the backstop on this has been, in many cases, attorneys general, including our own attorney general here in Rhode Island, Peter Nerona, blue state attorney generals, mind you, who have, on a litigation level, tried to push back against significant, I think, human rights violations. And I think that most people would agree with that, if you're being honest, that we've seen come from the Trump administration, but even just on a baseline level, an attitude, okay, and resistance and all that kind of stuff. That's all language. I mean, we saw what happened at No King's Day over the weekend. Tens or hundreds of thousands, millions, whatever the number is. I mean, you can tell me however many million people were there, and I think it was a really great thing, and it's great to show solidarity. But at the end of the day, this is an administration who literally doesn't care, and an administration that actively bashes and kind of does everything they can to denigrate any sort of popular movement against them. And what we're seeing here in the United States, we're not doing what Madagascar just did, where you actually have leadership flee the country and a youth-led resistance that is, mirrors more so what we saw in the Arab Spring than it does what we have seen in the No King sort of resistance, right? We're not seeing that happen. So the state level officialdom, right? That's a realm where actual resistance can happen in both action and attitude. And so to the governor's credit, over time here, over these last months, particularly in the last, I would say 4 months or so, the public-facing tone of the governor has dramatically shifted. He's done this with commentary. He's done this with videos. He's done this on the radio. He's done this or his team has done this with tweets and other social media posts. This election is going to be extremely focused on Donald Trump at the end of the day as we go into 2026. And yes, the Washington Bridge is a major issue, and yes, opioids are a major issue and all that. But I think a lot of the average people who feel disconnected from their state government right now, as proven by consistently low polling numbers for Governor McKee, one thing that is going to help them is to emphasize the fact that McKee has shifted dramatically, or at least somewhat substantially, in his approach to interfacing with Donald Trump. And they need to do a lot more of that. There is no reason why Dan McKee, and frankly folks as well, but Dan McKee right now needs to rebrand in a way that shows he is in fierce opposition to Donald Trump, and he has a seasoned, understanding of state government, understanding of budgets, and understanding of the needs and wants of this state by communication, a two-direction communication strategy. He needs to display that to this state to say, at the end of the day, you can talk about 40% polling numbers, you can talk about 17% polling numbers, you can talk about the Washington Bridge, you can talk about whatever you'd like. But understand, Dan McKee is going to be your backstop. Now, I'm not saying that that's true or possible. It may or may not be. But what is for sure is the storytelling and the brand positioning around McKee needs to be shifted. And I think they really have to go there, because at the end of the day, it's a midterm election, all right? And does it always trickle down to the governor's race? No, just ask Charlie Fogarty back in 2006, where he lost to Don Carcieri. Fogarty, the lieutenant governor then, a Democrat. That 2006 election, that's when Sheldon Whitehouse was elected. That was a big shift in this country. against the kind of neocon movement, right? And Iraq was on a lot of people's minds as they voted in senatorial and House races. But that does trickle, if you want to call it down ballot, to the state issues. And for me, I look at a 40% approval rating and I say this state does not necessarily understand the behaviors of or the goals of the McKee administration, and that needs to be reshifted around the issue of Donald Trump, because that, at the end of the day, is the big one that people are going to be looking for. I'm Bill Bartholomew. This is Bartholomew Town. Coming up this week, we will have a sit-down from his office, a sit-down with Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Neruda. He's been on the front lines resisting Trump. He has been highly critical of Governor Dan McKee. He has been highly critical in many ways of the political system just by virtue of saying he wants to get out of it. He's not going to be running for governor or lieutenant governor. We'll talk to him from his office about state issues and, of course, everything happening on the federal level. It's Bartholomew Town. Remember, you can listen wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, WPRO Radio here in New England, ripodcast.com, and now on YouTube.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,200 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our more than 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health and dental insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.